forward to my computer, and I will stop it, of course, when we go into our closed breakout session. Pam, I am watching the participant list. We have a waiting room, so I'll admit folks as I see them come in if you have some visitors who are joining us. So
Okay.
First of all, Dr. Cox, Dr. Rosenbaum, thank you very much from Gardner-Webb University for being a part of this committee and this journey with Pam. I can truly say I've enjoyed working with Pam. I've had an opportunity now to work with her over a number of semesters, and probably a year and a half, maybe two. We were trying to figure out that a little bit earlier on, but Pam is dedicated, finally has the work done, and feels really good about it, as she should. So at this point, I just want to remind you again, I just want to thank you again from Gardner-Webb University for being a part of this. I know it requires some of your time. I know it requires some commitment. So we just are grateful that you're helping one of our candidates. So with that, Pam, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can start sharing.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, I was going through some things this morning.
Some of that last minute.
Just checking. I do want to thank you all for being here this morning, bright and early. I especially want to thank my committee for your support and your encouragement throughout this process. I'm Pam Colbert, and today I'll be presenting my research, a quantitative phenomenological study of the proliferated use of electronics and the impact of communication skills on kindergarten students. The agenda for today's meeting, I will begin by briefly going over chapters 1 through 3 that you heard in my proposal defense, and then we'll spend the bulk of the time on chapters 4 and 5 looking at data collection, the results, and then the discussion. Chapter 1. The problem is, the reason I chose this is that the current research really has, there's much to be seen on kindergarten readiness, preschool importance, and how there has been a decline of kindergarten readiness skills. There is also research on the importance of preschool programs and distracted parenting, and also the impact of parental involvement. But there does not seem to be a lot there to address the recent phenomenon of public schools closing throughout the United States due to COVID-19 pandemic. And that has forced many parents to assume that role as teacher, and what that impact of shifting to a more electronic version of school has made on kindergarten readiness.
And Pam, let me just interrupt really quickly. Would you remind us how you would like for us to ask questions?
Yes, sir. I'm so sorry. You can ask questions throughout while we're on the slide. Feel free to just stop me at any time if you have any questions or would like something clarified. And then I'll also have question time at the end if you have something overall you'd like to ask. Thank you, Dr. Stone. So the purpose of this study was really to investigate the impact of that increased usage of digital formats that children participated in during remote learning, including kindergartners, and what that impact might have had on their kindergarten readiness, or at least the parents' perceptions of that. The research questions I'll be looking at and addressing in this research were, what do parents believe they are doing to prepare their child with the necessary skills before kindergarten? What skills do parents feel are important for a child's success in kindergarten? And how does participation in remote learning change how parents feel they should have prepared their children for kindergarten readiness? The theoretical framework that I'll be looking at is the constructivism, and that is really the child development and pedagogy of how children learn language, and the three standouts in that area, that field that I chose to research and look into their what they felt was important were Jean Piaget, Lev Vygotsky, and Avram Chomsky. And Piaget really focused on language development that was followed by cognitive development and not in tandem. The language was fundamentally a social factor, and we see that in kindergarten where children really learn socially by play, by talking with one another, playing in stations, playing in centers, and playing games together, and that children assimilate that language as a reflection of those around them. So those models are important. Vygotsky was the founder of social culture theory and approach to psychology, and he believed that the relationship cognitive and language developed together. So he believed that they took place simultaneously and as they developed. And language developed through, again, social interaction, a very important piece. Chomsky was a prodigy linguist, and he felt that the mind held the structure of those systems for language and believed that cognitive thought and language were complementary. So these hold the basis of that language development that's so important in this study. The limitations are that I was an administrator at the school previously. I did not have any of these kindergartners unless they were in preschool, but I was the administrator there if they had other siblings. And any quantitative study rests in the idea that it's limited to the researcher's ability to keep personal biases out of those results so that they don't impact the results that we're seeing. A delimitation was the sample studied is limited to one small elementary school in a rural part of the state and could not be generalized to other groups entering kindergarten in other areas. And there was no regard given to any demographics. I didn't collect any information on socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, or the parents' educational levels. In the literature review, I looked at three components: communication and language, kindergarten readiness, and technology. In communication and language acquisitions, we are born to be communicators. Babies start from the time they're born communicating their wants and needs by crying, cooing, making eye contact, and they learn these through modeling through adults. They look at our facial cues. When you smile at a baby, they smile back, and they're born communicating. They use symbolic play to cultivate that language. And, parents are always playing, games, little hand games, peekaboo with babies. And that, again, is part of cultivating that language. Babies or children use our emotional facial cues to store words and meaning. That is an important role in this when we look at technology, where the facial cues are, taken away because the parent or the child are looking at a one-dimensional figure on a screen. And so the child doesn't bring in any of the facial cues or emotion that are used to store those words properly in the brain, which can make it more difficult to retrieve those words when they are trying to find them to use them in their language. And language, both written and spoken, is quintessential in success in school. All other subjects rely on that ability to learn through written and spoken language, to be able to file that information, to relate it to something else that they've learned. And so that is one of the most important skills that children have, is language and speech as they enter kindergarten. And parents and caregivers, again, play a very important role as they serve as the children's teachers those first few formative years of life, when language is so rapidly increasing. And so it's important that we equip parents with what they need to know to be able to help their child enter kindergarten ready to learn. A brief history of public education. Education began many years ago in ancient Greece, and it included mostly males up till about age 12, where then they transferred to learn about being soldiers or warriors. Formal education in the United States began when the colonies first formed, but education at that time really looked like what the people in that colony wanted their children to learn. It was very specific to the parents' needs of those specific children, and it was males, again, up to about age 12 that were participants. In the 18th century, under Washington, we had the first tax-supported universal educational system, which included more children, but again, mostly white affluent people who were in those schools. And again, the educational system at that time was more specific to what those families or people in that area wanted their children to learn. It wasn't uniform. In the 19th century, public school shifted, and really the government was trying to ensure that school was for all parents and children, and included immigrants, the poor, and minorities at that time. And school became more uniform in what it studied, not specific from colony to colony. In the 1900s, a very important shift for us as educators was that Horace Mann and Henry Bernard built on the professionalism and the need for teaching standards, so that teachers were trained specifically with tools to help them model and have different learning opportunities for children that were uniform from place to place within our country, not just from town to town, but from state to state. Teachers had a more uniform expectation of being professionals and not just people who grew up in a school and assumed the role as headmaster or headmistress in a school and with really no formal training. And then public kindergarten began in the 1900s, specifically in North Carolina in 1970s. We had our first kindergarten classes. And just as we shift into that kindergarten readiness piece of the research, North Carolina had been having kindergarten for about 20 years, and the first study showed that already our children were not prepared for kindergarten. They weren't ready for those skills. North Carolina answered that with the development of Smart Start, which were preschool centers that were accredited, and they were monitored and had a specific standards that the children had to meet, including academics, but also the amount of play, the way their day was divided, and also the materials that they were exposed to are all monitored through Smart Start. The federal government offered Head Start, which was another way to have equality in preschools and monitor those from the federal standpoint. And those were free services for children who qualified. Since 2008, we've had a continual increase of about 12% in funding for Head Start. And I think most legislators and most people who study education understand the importance of that preschool and how children have the ability to attend a quality preschool, and that preschool follows guidelines so that it is consistent with other entities that are offering that same preschool education. Kindergarten entry assessments began in North Carolina about 10 years ago to measure that readiness. As soon as students went into school, they began having an assessment to just see how they were developing in different areas, such as social motor, motor skills, fine and gross motor skills, cognitive, their skill level, alphabet knowledge, number knowledge, and those types of skills. Unfortunately, and this, really concerned me when I saw this number. I had no idea it was this low, but in North Carolina, and this is last year's data, only 23% of our state's about 130,000 4-year-olds attend a quality preschool. And so that's very alarming as an educator. And so research shows that children who without preschool, they begin school about 12 to 14 months behind their peers. And when you're looking at 12 to 14 months, they can change that and close that gap, but only with very specific interventions that are intensive from an educator. And if teachers have, 18 to 20 kids and only about 25% of them are prepared, the ability of that teacher to work intensively with that many children is a daunting task, to say the least. So the importance of quality preschool continues to be a need for all of our students in North Carolina.
And Pam, if I could add something too, this gap, which starts with pre-kindergarten, it doesn't go away, in first grade, second grade, third grade. That's where teachers are working so extremely hard in our public system to try to close that gap. But the reality is that gap doesn't happen when they're in school. That gap is established well before they get there. So
yes,
that's the beauty of pre-K programs, is it can kind of eliminate or bring that gap, bring some closure to that gap. So I know that's one thing that as Superintendent Myra will tell you, and Betsy will tell you from her research, is that this idea that there's a gap that is started when you entered in kindergarten is just not true. Public schools are addressing the gap that was there before they ever got there.
Yes,
I think that's what your research shows.
It does. And one thing too with those daycares, when you have a few programs that are quality, what happens is people that are able to afford those programs are the ones who go into those programs, leaving your socioeconomic students that are disadvantaged at an even greater disadvantage to enter kindergarten, because not only do they not have the means to buy programs themselves and maybe have computer programs or games or learning materials, they're also not able to afford those quality programs, which makes that gap greater in addition to having socioeconomic gap. So it's very unfortunate. Looking at the increased use of technology, a few years ago, we would have not had a dissertation in Zoom. So we've all grown in our knowledge and ability to use and our need to use technology. And communication, unfortunately, has been negatively impacted by technology in ways such as, we don't have conversations as much. Things are quick and sometimes misread based on how they're read by the person and maybe not how the sender meant it. A lot gets lost in translation. Children experience less one-on-one interaction with their adults in their lives. Teachers, if it's in school, but also their parents, if everyone's on a device, they're not having that face-to-face interaction, which is imperative for language development. And children as young as 3 months are encouraged to interact with devices. I know you're like me, I've seen them at restaurants and different places where everyone in the family will have a device and no one's communicating verbally or even with facial cues with each other. They're all in their device world. And parents who are distracted by devices don't give the attention that their children need as they develop language. And 54% of parents reported an increase in social media and also technology for their work. So because more parents are working from home or, they're getting their work emails on their phone, they feel more that they need to interact with those as they come in instead of during their work hours. So they're letting their work time bleed into their family time that maybe they didn't do before technology. They went home from work and they were at home. And now those two worlds are mingled together and causing some distracted parenting by doing that. And children who live in this technology world, they have a higher rate of distress when parents are engaged with technology and feel that they are unimportant to their parents because they are not the priority where they should be at home. And children are developing language without those facial cues from adults, which I stated is very important for how they file those words so that they can have them for retrieval. In chapter 3, looking at the methodology, it is a quantitative descriptive approach, and I used a questionnaire. Parents of students who are enrolled in kindergarten in the 2021 academic school year participated if they chose. And this approach is often used when you're looking at trends or how to illustrate a phenomena across a population. The instrument was a questionnaire and it was customized to address research questions. And so I used a 5-point Likert scale in the survey, and it measured responses. In questions 1 through 24, which focused on question 1, we used a scale of 1, almost never, to 5, very often. Question 25 through 42 addressed question 2 in my research and used a scale of 1, not very important, to 5 being extremely important. And for questions 43 through 46, they addressed the third question in the research, and it was 1 very positive to 5 very negative. The research site was a very small rural school in the North Carolina foothills. It is a Title I school with about 48% free and reduced lunch. The students in this district do attend preschool at a high rate of 65% compared to the state's rate. There is a 95% attendance rate. And the last time we measured accountability, which was not last year due to the remote learning status and no EOG testing, but there was an accountability grade of a letter B. And this school in the study ended the 2020 school year with 100% of those children learning remotely, and began this current school year with kindergarten through 3rd grade return to school face-to-face, but only 4 days a week, and continued to have 1 day a week throughout the year learning remotely. The older students came back in October, 4th through 6th grade, and then we continued to bring students back till the end of the year. Students who chose to be back in the building were in the building, but again, 4 days a week in face-to-face and continued remote learning throughout the school year. The participants in this study, the sample limited to this one elementary school. The target population were parents of students who were enrolled in kindergarten during the 2021 school year. It was optional, and the sample included those who chose to participate. The,
May I ask a question?
Yes,
Going
sir.
back to that, you, even in your dissertation, I did not see that. How many people participated in the sample, and what's the demographic of the parents who participated? So what was the N? How many people?
Okay, the N is actually in my dissertation where I listed the figures, and it was 25. 97 were invited. That was the number of people that had children in kindergarten for the current school year. I did not collect demographics for this particular study.
Okay, so none of that is mentioned in your methodology, and even the tense is still in the future tense. So all of that would have to be addressed and corrected, because your methodology section is still will use, will participate. It's written in that future tense, and the N is not included. As it relates to the instrument that is used, is it a standardized instrument, or did you design it?
I did not design it. I found it from another researcher, and I asked permission to use that.
Okay. Do you have the validity, reliability of that instrument?
I can locate it.
Yeah, we would need the validity of that instrument, and it's a good thing. It adds value to your research. So we'll need the validity of that instrument, because if somebody else wants to have an offshoot research from your dissertation for posterity, it's important that that is included in that, so it's not a limitation of your study as it relates to that. So it would be helpful, and probably to give us, I know you gave some little bit of demographics of the site, which is pretty good. However, a little bit more in terms of race, gender would help, because when we talk about some of these opportunities of pre-K, kindergarten, sometimes either race or socioeconomic issues are part of this problem that we face, and the haves and the haves not. So to buttress your dissertation in addressing this issue, it may be helpful to provide that piece about the district per se and not the school, because we don't want to just narrow it down so somebody could nail it from the dissertation, but to just get that overall demographics, because we try as best as possible not to identify our sites. So, you know, somebody could look at your relationship with the dissertation on your district and could narrow it down based on the demographics that you presented. So even though the site is important, overall the district gives us an overview, and probably to tell us a little bit more about the kindergarten or pre-K attendance in the district.
Okay.
To give us a snapshot would be helpful. And thank you. You may continue.
Yes, very much. Thank you
Right.
for that feedback. Looking at the data analysis, it was a descriptive statistics. We looked at mean and standard error of the mean, and they were calculated. The repeated measures, one-way ANOVA, was a means for the different learning domains within each subset of the survey. And these showed trends and provide systematic information about the phenomenon. Research question 1 again was questions 1 through 24. Research question 2, what skills do parents feel are important for a child's success in kindergarten? Questions 25 through 42, and the section of the questionnaire. And then research question 3 were addressed in 43 through 46. The significance of the study is that there is a lot of research for kindergarten readiness, and many of the studies show how preschools can improve. But this quantitative phenomenological study will add to the previous research by addressing the change in parent perceptions following remote learning in the current pandemic conditions. And the research is important to identify how parent perceptions changed and provide training then and skills for the parents to help them better prepare their children for school as they go through the future. I'm looking at chapter 4 and our results. Question 1, what do parents believe they are doing to prepare their children with the necessary skills before entering kindergarten? Parents reported on a 5-point Likert scale, with 1 indicating almost never and 5 indicating very often. The average ratings were calculated for items within the 5 learning domains, being language communication, social emotional, motor, cognitive, and technology. If you see here in this particular graph, we have a bar graph, and the 5 domains of the skills are represented on the x-axis, and the average frequency ratings are displayed on the y-axis. The N is 25. A rating of 1 corresponds with almost never, and 5 indicated very often. The error bars represent the standard error of measure. So when you see this information, before entering kindergarten, parents prepared their children in a variety of ways, using often or sometimes. They used social emotional was lower than our cognitive and language communication, and technology was the lowest of all as far as their average ratings. The importance to take away here is that parents did feel it important to prepare their children. And, you know, we have to prepare for anything in life. We prepare when we're going on a trip, we pack the right clothing, we prepare when we're going to college, we prepare by taking prerequisite classes, and kindergarten also requires preparation. Parents saw that there was a need for preparation, so the parents in our study did prepare their children in some ways. The thing I would like for you to note is that language and communication fell in the 3.5, which was the sometimes area. For language to be able to be improved, we need to move that to the often, everyday area. Children need to have language exposure and activities that increase their language and communication skills at a higher rate than average, sometimes. And that is true also of social, emotional, and cognitive skills. The frequency ratings show us that the average parents in this study and children of opportunities participated in cognitive and language communication, and motor skills at some of the time. And then the area that was lower was their social, emotional, and then technology. A one-way repeated measures ANOVA was used to assess the differences in the averages of those 5 domains. So those were the averages of the parents in each domain. There was a significant main effect of learning domain. And with the significant effect, we learned that prior to attending kindergarten, parents spent most of their time fostering cognitive, language, and motor skills. The average of cognitive and language were sometime, and the implications there is for parents to increase the amount of time for cognitive and language communication skills, again, to daily to be ready. And language communication skills are necessary for the learning in other subjects throughout school, and not just school, into adulthood. So it's very important that we maintain strong skills in language and communication, especially. Research question 2.
So could I ask a question about research question 1? Based
Yes,
on your findings of Quisted research 1, how does that relate to your theoretical framework of Vygotsky Piaget?
That relates because the domains that are there are in the child development. For Vygotsky and Piaget, when they looked at child development, they looked at those domains as far as how children developed, and there's specific time periods in a child's life when they develop certain skills to be able to build those to go to the next skill.
Okay, and then how does that relate to your constructivist approach?
The constructivist approach is looking at that development and how children learn, how they learn overall, and by language being something that they participate in, they learn it faster.
Okay, so is this addressed in your write-up in the final analysis? Because you have to tie in your conceptual framework with your findings to ensure that if you're talking about this whole piece of Piaget stages of development and Vygotsky talks about scaffolding and also zone of proximal development as it relates to learning. When you choose a theoretical framework, you have to buttress the findings of your research with the theoretical framework to say, this is what Vygotsky talked about, or this is what Piaget talks about in the final analysis of your findings, to wrap around, you know, what you are finding and supporting it with the research, the methodology, the literature review that you do also in the beginning, because you don't want to, the reason you selected the theoretical framework was to see if your findings could align with the theories itself. And so that has to be fully addressed for each of your questions, to say this relates to Vygotsky, this relates to Piaget, and you cite how these findings of you know, learning, communication, or sensory motor or cognitive relates to what Piaget was talking about in the stages of development, or what Vygotsky was talking about. And that is not clearly evident in your analysis. Your analysis is very detailed and relevant, but for every finding you have, it would be very helpful to say exactly this is what Piaget was talking about, fine motor skills, this is what, and then the technology piece itself probably ties into the constructivist approach. And you want to say, well, okay, the shift, the paradigm shift that is happening right now in the learning process, like you said, it, kids in restaurants with their parents, they tend to use all of this stuff. But you're looking at that, it's not evident in your question one, that regardless of how all their toys and gifts and all of that stuff, everything around them is technological. Technology seems to be at a 2 on a scale of 5. So something is amiss right here. And is it the parents who have the problem? Because the kids can only learn what the parents give them at that age. So there's a significant deficit right here that shows that probably the parents who participated are not that technological savvy, or they're trying to train their children the way they were raised and totally ignore the role technology will play. We don't know that, but another research could find that. But that is really, it stands out that what is happening right here, when every gadget that kids receive for Christmas or their birthdays is technologically driven, why is this a disparity right now? And your study highlights it, which is significant, but then something needs to be addressed as an outcome of your research now, to say, you know, the technology millennial children are not being technology ready based on what we're looking for. So you understand where I'm coming from with?
I do, yes, sir.
Yeah. So not that I want to give you extra work. I mean, your research is really engaging, but you don't want to leave gaps. Somebody read
Right.
this 10, 15 years from now, they may say something is missing right here. I wish this person had addressed it fully
Okay.
in a way that connects this COVID period and all of that stuff, because this dissertation is published during the COVID era. And it's grounded in a way that could support next steps for building kindergarten programs and what teachers should look for with kids coming into their kindergarten class. So,
Okay, thank you very much for that feedback. I took
you're
some
so
notes.
welcome, ma'am. All right.
Yes, sir. Let's see. So question 2, what skills do parents feel are important for the success of a child in kindergarten? And these were 18 learning objectives for kindergarten students, and parents rated them on a 5-point Likert scale again, with 1 corresponding to not at all important and 5 corresponding to extremely important. This I found very interesting. If you look at the information in this graph, you see that the 5 domains again are represented on the x-axis, and the average importance ratings are displayed on the y-axis. Again, the N is 25. A rating of 1 corresponded to not at all important, and 5 indicated extremely important. The parents rated social emotional very important, but if you'll remember back when they were preparing for their students, to enter kindergarten, that was not an area of importance. But when they thought about what they wanted teachers to pay attention to and assess their children in, they really were concerned about that social emotional piece, and less important to them were the cognitive and language and technology again. The parents' perceptions could be explained by the fact that, if you'll remember, before their children entered kindergarten, they weren't able to participate in social events, social activities face-to-face, indoor or outdoor gatherings due to the restrictions of COVID-19, which might explain why their level of social activities that they prepared their children with were lower than cognitive and language, but that they still see it as important once the child is in kindergarten and the teacher is assessing those skills. The average ratings, importance ratings, were calculated again with items pertaining to the 5 domains. A one-way ANOVA was used to assess the differences in the average of those 5 domains. There was again a significant main effect of learning domain, and the average importance of social domain was significantly higher than the averages for technology, language, and motor skills. Parents rated that social emotional very important on the scale, and this signifies that parents feel that social emotional learning is an important and is the most important domain in kindergarten, but this does not correlate with how they spent their time preparing their child for kindergarten.
Pam, this is beautiful with what you've done. You know, so I think to answer 2, I would love, not to give you extra work, to take graph 1 and align it with graph 2, because it tells a story. What the parents did and what they saw that their kids need. And if you look at even just the technology piece, you could see there's a strong correlation there, that the parents did not give their kids enough technology, but they're asking the schools to give them technology. So if you put those 2 graphs into one, especially for question 2, you could give a good comparative analysis of exactly what it is and to see how it rolls by. And then, you know, you could begin to time. I don't know how well you could time your question 2 with your conceptual framework, because this is now as an ask. The parents are asking or looking forward to the school to say, we've done this job. This is what I will want you to do. And so if you match the graphs in one graphic representation, as you analyze question 2, graphically, it tells a good story. And you may be able to write a better analysis if you fuse the 2 together. You've done a great job with this piece, and you are telling it the way it is on that graph, but it tells a stronger or a better story if the 2 graphs are in one graphic representation. Then it allows you to do a comparative analysis that speaks to folks who see graphic representation better than linguistic presentation, which helps, because I'm going between the 2 graphs right now as you are presenting, and I could see the beauty of what this is and what it could be in terms of what the parents are expecting from the school. So it's a nice presentation, and, you know.
Great suggestion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And I was amazed too when I saw one graph from the other. I like the idea of putting them together. In question 3, we talk about how does participation in remote learning change how parents felt they should have prepared their children for kindergarten readiness. Parents indicated the perceived impact of technology on their child's ability to interact socially, communicate, learn new content, and develop fine motor skills on a 5-point Likert scale. The scale indicated the impact of technology, with 1 indicating very negative impact, 3 indicated no impact, and 5 indicated a very positive impact. The importance here too is to think about that for the first time, the majority of our parents and some grandparents were sitting elbow to elbow to their child as they learned kindergarten. And I had one parent who I can specifically, think about during our remote learning, who asked me why the teacher was spending so much time on one letter. And that's the way they've always done kindergarten. But the parents didn't know that because they were never sitting elbow to elbow with their child as they learned, as they were in remote learning. So they could really see what skills their child needed, what was important, how their child was able to manipulate various tools that they used in kindergarten for the first time. So again, we look at this information here, and these skills were indicated on the y-axis, and the percentage of the ratings corresponded on the x-axis to the negative. Very negative is in blue, and negative is red, neutral is yellow, positive is green, and very positive is orange for each skill displayed on the x-axis. And again, the N was 25. So here we can see kind of the breakdown of most of the parents felt that technology had a fairly positive, if you look at the green and orange together, that technology had a fairly positive impact on their child. The area where they were more either no effect or a negative, we look at their fine motor skills and motor skills in general. That's gripping, pinching, catching, riding, running, walking, all those skills. And then again, their ability to interact socially and communication. They were very pleased and with really no negative impact for the ability to learn new content. They felt that that was a good tool. The technology was a good tool for that. But the other areas, they did have some that had, there was some negative impact on some of the parent ratings. A one-way repeated measures ANOVA was used to assess the differences in the average impact ratings for the 4 skills, and there was a significant main effect of skill type. The average impact rating for technology on children's ability to learn new content was higher, again, than the impact on rating of development of fine motor skills or their ability to interact socially. Generally, again, the parents presented a positive impact of that technology on those domains, and the parents indicated, again, the highest negative impact was on the social emotional domain. And if you'll think back to what they felt the schools should prepare their children with was that social emotional piece. And again, they are feeling that the technology had a more negative impact on it than it did the other domains.
Okay, so if we could just go back to that, and as you were speaking, I was hearing Piaget in your thought process. And like I said, the beauty of selecting a theoretical framework is to tie it to your findings. And this is probably what Piaget was saying. So in parentheses, you could throw Piaget.
Okay.
In those sentences, in your findings, as you pull them down, go back and look at what your Vygotsky says, what your Piaget says, and all of that stuff. But in this section, I just want to, are you an educator in North Carolina?
Yes, sir.
Educator in North Carolina. I don't like to give students extra work, especially when they've done their dissertation, but I like for history to reflect the excellence of the work they do. So everything I recommend, I always think 25 years from now, if somebody were to pick up your dissertation and read it when we are all old and gone and retired, what story would it tell? North Carolina have the digital learning competencies, and it's not actually addressed in your dissertation, and you have a question on technology. And so it's not like an optional piece because the NCDLC, Digital Learning Competencies, as aligned with EST, is the backbone of what North Carolina believes that every classroom teacher should integrate. And so it's a core of the curriculum, the vehicle that drives instruction. And COVID era really change the landscape for digital integration in North Carolina. And so, which is beautiful. And just by coincidence, your research now ties back into Vygotsky. Now, Vygotsky talks about using the knowledgeable adult to help the students. And I could hear you talk about grandparents and parents sitting with their grandkids or children, teaching them who are not actually teachers.
Right.
And so it really ties back into this whole constructivist knowledge of who teaches who and with what knowledge, and the role that the digital competencies play in North Carolina, because it's a requirement. And because it's a requirement, even with the shift to remote learning for kindergarten, there's a kindergarten curriculum for the digital learning competencies, which talks about use of acceptable use and all of those things that tie into this whole learning process, and the use of technology to prepare the 21st century students right up to this 21st century framework that ties into technology. So, I mean, I'm making it optional for you. I mean, what you've done and presented is good. It could be better, and you could feel great about yourself. Because since you have a question 3 that deals with technology, it will be helpful to go back in your research question 1 or in your theoretical framework to talk about what the state is talking about in technology integration, which is the digital learning competency. And you could put it as an appendix, so you don't have to do a lot of writing because it's already stated. But the state is also looking at the TPAC for technology and what that means for integration for K-12. And it starts in even preschool, going into kindergarten. So you would make a decision with your chair on that. But I think this area, question 3, ties into your constructivist approach and Vygotsky. And I think as you come up with your findings and impact on the technology component, it would be nice for you to tag it and make a case, probably like where they say the parents indicated the highest negative impact was to the social emotional domain, which happens with remote learning, and it was expected. But based on what Piaget was saying, it's a stage that they have to go through. But because they were not in school, it changed that perspective.
Right.
And then that, your social emotional learning changes, which would not be the case if they were in school every day, because they would be interacting with their peers and teachers and teacher assistants and all these other adults who are in the school system. So, I mean, I just want to throw that for you to think that, but if you could tag a sentence in your chapter 1, or even a brief description in your chapter 2 about the North Carolina digital learning competencies, it would align with your question 3, and you could just put an addendum to add the digital learning competencies, so there's not a whole lot of writing that you have to do. Right. But just say North Carolina has adopted the digital learning competencies, and those competencies start from kindergarten through 12th grade, and so all kids are expected to, and this would relate to your question 3, and it will just make it beautiful when it's all said and done. I think you'll feel good about it.
Okay, thank you. This is just that information in another way. Again, this was the impact of ratings on technology, and rating 1 was very negative, 3 corresponded to no impact, and 5 indicated that very positive. But again, you can see that the parents, except for the ability to learn new content, stayed more towards the middle, the some of the time, or the no impact, one way or the other, but they really felt strongly that the ability to learn new content was impacted by the technology in a positive way.
And this is why you tell the North Carolina digital learning competencies. Yes, we're seeing it from the parents, so we know it has value. And the constructivist approach of teaching with technology, you could tag that back and either go to Vygotsky or Dewey or somebody. Papier talked about that in his writing. It's how technology impacts student learning. So you're having good results. It's just the ability to tag those things. I mean, as a novice researcher, it's a difficult skill, and it comes natural to some of us who've done this for 25 years. We could just sit and say, yeah, with that sentence, I could put, this is what Piaget was talking about. This is what Vygotsky talks about. This is what who talks about, but it's not as easy for the novice researcher. But your results are really positive, and addressing the fundamental issues of your theoretical framework, but you could see, you need to be able to tie that in as best as you can, and it will come down the road once you do a whole lot more research. But
Okay.
I'm appreciating your research.
Thank you.
As you could tell, I'm speaking about your research like I've been with you along the road, and I only just perused it for this presentation, which means it has good value.
Thank you.
So thank you for that.
Thank you. My recommendations for future research, and I do see several avenues where future research could happen, is to determine the long-term effects of the increased use of technology by children prior to kindergarten, to see if that over time there is an impact for them as they use more and more technology. It is also recommended that a longitudinal study be conducted in the school to follow the students in kindergarten as they move through the 12th grade, to look at that academic performance and how that gap is changing, or if it's changing, and what could be done to make those changes. Also, I think doing the research in the future, it would be important to add demographic data from the parents, just to get a feel for whether it is based in socioeconomic status, or if it is based in race or ethnicity, or what role parents' educational background plays in how their children are prepared in kindergarten, and so that we can continue to offer tools to the children who are not prepared to better meet their needs. Research completed in other schools across the state to determine if the research findings are similar in another area, or if it's specific to this small rural school, would also be important information to have. And then also, future studies should add questions concerning the amount of screen time that are experienced by children prior to attending school, as well as the amount of screen time parents experience while they're parenting young children prior to their entry of school. I think all of those things would give a better picture of how technology is impacting language, and how we can use technology as a tool. It's here to stay. I don't think technology is going away. So how can we change what we are doing in the school setting or in the preschool setting to meet the needs of those children who are using more technology, and their families are more technology oriented? This study contributed to the field, providing insight to the impacts of remote learning using technology as it relates to kindergarten readiness skills. So again, how has remote learning changed education, and how will it impact us going forward in the future as we continue to educate children post-COVID, and what that means in the future? In summary, parents do believe that their children should be prepared for kindergarten. They may not understand the importance of those learning domains for success. I believe that's where it's our role as educators to help parents of even very young children several years prior to entering kindergarten. This information needs to be in their hands. New parents need to go home from the hospitals with their babies with information on what they can expect at certain stages, and how they can contribute positively to that learning for those young children. Children who enter kindergarten below the readiness level will continue to have significant delays and gaps without that intensive intervention by educators. And as technology increases, our parents have to be educated on the importance of setting limits for technology based both on the child's age. The Pediatric Medical Association doesn't believe that any child, younger than age 3 should have technology in their hands. They've loosened that some, but it's very important that parents limit the amount of time children are on technology, and also themselves, so that they're interacting face-to-face with those young children. And standardized preschool programs need to be instituted for children age 3 and 4 prior to kindergarten. I know that much work has been done in continuing to beef up our preschool programs. Schools are adding preschool classrooms to their school setting, but there needs to be more. If in North Carolina, we still have only about 25% of our 4-year-olds in a quality program, then there's much work to be done in North Carolina. I want to thank you again for attending. Thank you again so much to my committee and Dr. Bull for you being here today and your wonderful feedback. If you have any other questions or feedback, I open the door and welcome that now. Thank you again.
Okay, I will give my feedback and exit and let your committee deal with it. Could you just go like 3 slides back? Because
Yes.
I think it's important. Go back. Yeah, right there. Stop right there with the constructivist piece. The definition of what you have for constructivism should tie into your end product as you make these final decisions or comments or results or what you may call it, extrapolate, because that's what we do from research. So constructivism is based on the precepts of prior knowledge, okay? And you may want to make sure you address that, because in your methodology, the constructivist approach is based on prior knowledge, which ties into everything that you're doing, that the knowledge the kids come into kindergarten with is given from their parents. And that's why you started where the instructions start with the parents, which is beautiful. So that prior knowledge is what ties into it. And it helps with the remote learning that we use now to move forward. So constructivism is based on 5 precepts. 1 is the prior knowledge of the student. 2 is the authorship, that the student has this ability to design what they think the knowledge relates to. And then 3 is ownership, like whatever they do, they take ownership. 4 is collaboration. And we have that collaboration either with the parents or grandparents at home moving in. And 5 is assessment, which is based on this whole principle of an interpretation of what the student means. So A is not for apple, but A could be for anthill. Why you select that? It talks about that piece, which I just want to bring that to you for you to understand. You know, when you say it adds to the field of constructivism, yes, it does, but I don't think you've articulated that well. So I'm helping you thinking of those 5 things and how did any of those happen? What is the prior knowledge? Because that's the most important thing. For students to construct knowledge is their prior knowledge. And so you have to be cognizant of that. Then move forward. You bring in a lot of your biases into this research, so you have to be careful, things you did not study that you're making a case for. So right here, your study was on parents' perception of how this whole learning takes place, technology and all of that stuff. That's why you're studying the parents, okay? So your emphasis needs to be on the parents, which you've done. So go forward 1 slide.
Go forward?
Yes, forward, ma'am, yeah. No, I think we skipped a slide. Go back 1. I think it's where, go back 1 more. Recommendations, good.
Oh.
Go back 1 more. Okay, all right. So recommendations for future studies. So who are your participants? Your participants were parents, okay? And so one of the recommendations you should have is, how do we prepare parents to prepare their children? Okay, because this is how they did at home, and we've seen the effect of what the parents did, and they could help education to move forward. So if school systems are intentional, knowing what COVID has done to the educational structure of education, intentionally now we should have professional development for parents to teach them basic pedagogical strategies to help them focus on how to teach their students in case we are faced with another pandemic or the school decides to restructure. I think it's important. The research has to be on the parents. Why are they focusing on certain things intentionally? We need to be able to do that. So one of the recommendations for future studies is to study the parents themselves.
Okay.
Parents of the younger kids and what schools could do to create that culture so that we are all stakeholders in this fight. So the parents, the school administration, the teachers and the students who are the focus of this triangle, we all work together to help them so that they're able to provide the pre-school education that would support the structured traditional school education, okay?
Mhm.
So that's important. Then go back forward one slide. So I see your bias right here. Now, I don't know how you reached on this amount of screen time, but the study done on the parent side shows that technology was the least, okay? Technology was the least of the things that the parents did at home. So why are we studying screen time and parenting on education using screen time? This is your bias coming in because that's what the research says, that lots of kids, but in this study, it was not the case. That these kids did not get a whole lot of technology based on the parents' perspective of this space. So probably it's the converse. They need to increase probably screen use that is relevant to content, not just for games. So if you want to look at future studies, you could look at the use of technology to support instruction and not to support any other things. But in kindergarten, social skills, cognitive learning, linguistics acquisition, spatial intelligence, interpersonal, these are all things kindergarten students need. And they get a whole lot of that from technology if their parents don't interact with them. So I may be leery about this whole piece right here, but it's okay. And I think you're a passionate educator, and we know we have to limit screen time, but we need to improve it, especially in rural areas where parents, based on this study, may not be giving the students a lot of screen time. Probably the quality of the network is not as robust. Certain areas don't get enough technology.
Right.
Cost of maintaining a robust internet could be an issue. I'm not making judgment, but these are all factors that could affect use of technology where the parents say we may not have it or we cannot, or those types of things. And but you have a beautiful research here, a relevant one, and one that impacts future education. I think just filling one or two blanks are things that would add value to this research. And I think continuing the work of working with parents, because I think that's where the issue is now. Let us work with the parents of these kids. Once they come in preschool or kindergarten, let us all be teachers, which is what Vygotsky talks about. Who is the expert knowledge? Well, it's the teacher, a knowledgeable student, and a knowledgeable parent, pretty much, because we want when the kids go home, we give them assignments or homework. Who does that with them? It's the parent. So the parent becomes a second teacher. And that's what Vygotsky talked about. So if you're able to tangle with those things, it would be fine. So I wish you well, and
thank you.
Thank you. And if there are any questions or comments from the committee members, I've been talking a whole lot. I like to talk anyway. But when I see value, I like to add to it. I'm like the commercial BASF. I don't make the things, I just make them better. So
Thank you.
Any questions or comments for me, Dr. Stone?
No, thank you, Dr. Bull. I have taken notes and I see some great value and worth, and that's something Pam and I can, after the session, can talk about.
Okay.
And I admire and I respect your expertise. You may not know this, but I believe this is Dr. Bull's field. So he is the expert on this, Pam, and for the committee. So I see great value. Thank you, Dr. Bull.
Well, it's a pleasure, sir, and thank you for your leadership and chairship of such a beautiful dissertation.
Yes, Dr. Bull, I just looked up your dissertation topic and your published articles, and you certainly have a lot of expertise here, so it's very valuable.
Well, thank you. And I teach in the instructional technology program at the master's level, so it's a passion of mine.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, good luck with it, and if you need clarity, feel free to call me at any time. I will set up a Zoom session, drop my dinner to make sure I work with the students. So that's how passionate I am. And
I really appreciate that offer.
no, please do. Please do. Just call me. Dr. Stone will give you my telephone number. And on a dime, I could set up a quick Zoom. We could talk about it, go through it, fill in the gaps if it needs to be. I don't like to give students extra work. I'm sorry I did not read
No,
it
I appreciate
prior
it.
to, but I have to read every dissertation, and with the work that is going on, it's overwhelming sometimes. So, my apologies for coming in late. But that chapter 2, rewrite your methodology in the change the tense from future. I know people write those for proposal, they never visit it back, but yeah, it's just a matter of changing those things. Okay.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Okay then. All right. All right. It's a pleasure, sir.
Are there any other questions or comments for Pam from the committee?
I would just say that another future research topic here would be to dig into those demographics of those parents. A study could be done on, as was mentioned earlier, the effect that socioeconomic status or English as a second language, those as you mentioned, the age of the parents, those would be all really fascinating studies to see how those demographics of those kindergarten parents affect their feelings and the things that you measured in your survey, Pam. Mm-hmm. So it would be really interesting to see how parents view things in different ways, depending mm-hmm. on really the fact that we have multiple generations raising children. Yes, and you know that to be true. And of course we have parents of different backgrounds and resources, poverty versus those who are very comfortable. And just as a personal note, I'm in my mid-40s raising a 3-year-old. My view of doing that now versus if I was in my mid-20s raising a 3-year-old or a pre-kindergartner would be probably different. As far as another study would be parents who work versus parents who don't, parents' background as far as their education is concerned, so forth and so on. So you really have a great study here that you've done, and I just think it would be enhanced so much in so many different directions if you looked at the various demographics there. But it's very interesting what you've done here, Pam, and you've done a great job.
All right.
Well, Pam, I thought it was a fascinating study too. Dr. Bull and Dr. Rosenbaum have said some things that I had jotted down as I was reading. And one of the biggest things that I wanted to follow up with you on is how this study can impact Elkin City schools. So hold on, I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. Let me cut it off. I apologize for that. And I think Dr. Bull summed it up, and that is, my question for you is going to be 2 parts. What are the implications for Elkin City schools since you are an employee here? And then secondly, how will you follow up with parents? And he mentioned the work that we can do with parents to stay connected with them after their children come to school. We talk about the partnership between home and school, and I think this is an excellent jumpstart from your research is to, I think what he said was, let us all be teachers. Mm-hmm. And I loved that.
I do too.
So anyway, I thought you did a tremendous job. I loved your literature review. I too enjoyed, and I do think it would strengthen your dissertation. I sent you a text while you were talking, and while he was sharing feedback that said he really believes in your topic, or he wouldn't have spent the amount of time he did providing you the constructive feedback that he did. I think he sees in your research and in your paper, your results, that this can be set up for future studies. It could easily be replicated by another person who's writing their dissertation. So kudos to you for choosing such a fresh topic, a very timely topic, and one that I think can not only impact Elkin City schools, but schools across the world. You did a great job.
Thank-
I agree, Pam. And your study has implications for speech therapists, for pre-K teachers, for elementary teachers, for parents, for technology specialists. There's so many avenues that this research could be taken, reviewed, used, and people will be quoting you and citing you in the future because of your work here, especially because you are on the cutting edge of pandemic research, which is just now coming down the pike. So a lot of good quality information here that can be used in multiple venues.
Thank you.
All right, Pam, I am going to stop recording and I